So, hello everyone. Welcome to the fourth panel of this conference called Towards Environmental Justice. We are going to hear today four presentations. For each presentation, we are going to have 15 minutes. After which the panelists will have 10 minutes to reflect on all of the presentations after they all present. And after that, we are going to have questions from the audience. I'm going to chair today's panel. My name is Rufat Demirov. I'm from Macedonia. I'm RGPP alumna. I finished my master's at CE in political science, and currently I'm doing my PhD in international relations. I suggest we start with the first presentation. We are going to hear from Gergely Papp, who is co-founder and leader of the PAD Foundation, and he is also co-researcher of the Hungarian Water Inclusion Initiative, which is dealing with social exclusion and water access. The paper he's going to present is called Socially Inclusive Post-Industrial Brownfield Rehabilitation as a Tool in Urban Periphery Climate Change Adaptation. So the floor is yours. You have 15 minutes to present.
I am Gergely Papp. You see, I'm the co-founder and field researcher and community organizer in our foundation. And is it able to share the presentation?
Yes, you can share.
So yes, we started to share it. And I'm sorry. And our organization, it's the last few years, started to focus to this post-industrial middle cities in Hungary, and we are starting to focus it because also we are some connections and relations with these neighborhoods who are living in the urban periphery in this kind of post-industrial towns. And we also found in our fieldwork experiences that there is a lot of time this segregated neighborhoods, or this neighborhood that started segregated, is close proximity to this kind of post-industrial or brownfield areas of this urban periphery, and there is a overwhelmingly environmental threats and degradation in this area, and also there is some social practice from the majority of the citizens of these urban settings. For example, in the inner city there is accumulated in this urban periphery connected to environment, or connected to, for example, illegal garbage dump in this area. There's a lot of conflict points in this area, and also, you know, our field works, we realize that the local community has some existing practices which are dealing with how to handle this kind of degraded lands, which, for example, mine, which are started to reforest in an organic way, the local community started to somehow handle this kind of territories. And yeah, and our idea was that that was the one of the 0 point that first we started to with the community. We started a community advocacy, or trying a community advocacy to have the neighborhood survive, because the local municipality the last 20 years they would like to somehow eliminate this neighborhood, but they have no tools and they have no money, but there's a ongoing political intention that they would like to eliminate this neighborhood. But there wasn't any concept that what the municipality could do, cooperate with the local community who are living in this neighborhood. And we would like to somehow figure it out with the community, that how we could show the municipality that this area is useful and it's able to use in a much more mixed use, so not just for housing but for also for wood and other areas developed, and also for small and medium-sized businesses. And yeah, and that's how we started to create our multi-purpose woodland system. And yeah, it's in this way. First of all, it was one of our big challenges that the municipality was didn't want to cooperate with the neighborhood community for a maintenance of urban woodland area next to the neighborhood. So we decided with the neighborhood that we first of all we create a small garden, and we show that we're able to maintenance this kind of small garden. And after all, this told a lot about it. That's how problematic it is that we have to prove that okay, we are able to manage this area. But yeah, we finally agreed with the community that we started to do this kind of area, and after we create this more small scale garden. This is a small scale garden. After we are able to start to negotiate with the municipality for a bigger land next to the neighborhood, which was unused and was a municipal land, how we able to manage it with cooperation with the municipality. And it was also it was also challenging that there is a core community in the neighborhood from between 10 or 15 members of this community. And yeah, and with this community, we started a community planning for the small scale garden. And yeah, and then we first of all we decided with this core group that we design this garden in the center of the neighborhood, but after a while we realized that maybe in the one part of the other part of the neighborhood could be better, because there are more active residents in the neighborhood, that part of the neighborhood, who are willing to maintain it. So yeah, this also was a challenge that where we start, in which public spaces we start this kind of green space development in the neighborhood. And also there was some challenges that in this kind of green spaces, which is next to the neighborhood, which are started to reforest. There are some invasive species or so-called invasive species like acacia or this kind of species, which are the local the residents are starting to use it, and they are starting to use it for their everyday lifetime and maintenance to their households and also for their energy use. But in the municipality, yeah, officially they don't want to allow to use this kind of species because it's called invasive, and it's also an ongoing challenge. You know that the municipality say that informally it's okay for them to use this kind of species with the local community, but on the other side, we are not able to build build it in our concept plan that how to maintain this area. So yeah, it's an ongoing challenge that how to able to recognize with the municipality that this kind of areas we are maintenance and that's need to contribution for the maintenance from the municipality, but on the other side we maintenance species which are not recognizable official from the municipal side. Yes, about that. There was also in this planning process a mental mapping process where we figure it out that which part this is the neighborhood and which part of the neighborhood that could we start for this small scale garden. And but yeah, on the other side, it was very useful to work with the municipality, not a political decision employees, but with the professional employees, for example, the maintenance side or the public space maintenance side, and from them we give a lot of good recommendation that how to find a proper place which good for this multi-purpose woodland system next to the neighborhood. Yeah, and nowadays we are in this stage that we are started to create this small scale garden, and we started to push or start trying to push through the municipality to able to design a mixed use zone where it's not need to decide that this area is just for housing or just for woodland or just for small scale businesses, but you're able to use it mixed, because we think that if we try to contextualize the area in the mixed use circumstances, there's a much bigger chance to build a long-term sustainability also for the neighborhood. And that's all in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gergely, for the interesting presentation. We are moving to the next presentation. We are going to hear from Edina Tordai about the paper called Towards Environmental Injustice, Examining Human Rights of Roma Communities in Europe. Edina holds a Jurist doctor degree in law and political science from the University of Debrecen, and she has also passed Hungarian legal bar exam. Currently, she is a PhD candidate at the doctoral school of the Faculty of Law at the University of Pécs. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the organizers to make this event happens, and I hope that the presentation will also in line with the others one. Actually, yesterday and today I have several moments when I was just wanting to somehow leave with my presentation, speak about it, and rather just so my presentation and my paper. Sorry, I just.
Should this go to this one?
I'm sorry for that.
Yeah, but you can also use.
Okay.
You can also use this.
So my paper and my presentation was about generally we are experiencing and we were speaking about it, so climate change and environmental population are a pressing challenge globally, and international entities also pay attention to this from 2015 when the United Nations accepted the social development goals or declared the social development goals. All the relevant regional, international bodies and even bigger multinational companies reacted to that. So somehow became kind of trend that sustainability is such an important topic, and it's SDG also important because it makes connect that sustainability is not just about environmental issues, but also important that vulnerable groups and people who are living under poverty line and their needs has to be also dealt with. And not just the social development goals, but itself the other as I mentioned, UN bodies also declared that these challenges period are more useful for marginalized population. And women, children, indigenous people, or other minorities are in this situation. Limited us, and generally, and yesterday was also mentioned that who have the less polluters at the same time they are being like the most affected by these changes. It's also well established international bodies that environmental issues impact health. And it's also in European level, the environmental agency, the European Environmental Agency is following this UN path. And in Europe, the air pollution, the extreme temperature, normalized are the typical environmental concerns. Also emphasizing that there are certain groups, elderly children, and socioeconomic groups who are more vulnerable for this. At the same time, when we're seeing this kind of declaration and also commitment to find a solution for this problem and also helping them for these people, it's interesting and the question that where are Roma, how Roma situation are considered, and because of that, before I went to human rights situation analysis, I went through the Green Deal and Roma framework strategies, because these policy papers are basis for legislation, for obligation for member states, and also give some ideas how Europe thinks about these environmental justice, if it even exists, and Roma communities. And before going to that, I just wanted to find a concept, what is environmental justice means. And in general, it's having two main discourse or two main explanations for it. Itself, the environmental justice is a movement we started in the US, and recently in the US it's considered as a procedural environmental justice, which means that every social group independently from their origin, race origin, social status, economical status has to be meaningfully involved in decisions which relates to environment. It has to be a meaningful involvement, and also it's fair treatment and meaningful involvement, which is, I think it could be another basis for a good presentation of a paper, but generates a procedural one. And the other one is the substantive one, which consider that like the burden, environmental burdens and advantage are shared equally. And so it's a discrimination element. It's really important, and yesterday was several times mentioned about the environmental racism is the concept when people it's also different how it's in the US or how it's in Europe, but people of national minorities or certain ethnic groups are more affected by environmental harms, and sometimes it's a bit as an outcome of how to say active, but sometimes it's passive outcome of being passive by lack of actions or lack of policies implemented. So with this, I started to look in a Green Deal. Green Deal having 3 pillars, and one of the pillars is the social one, and they're really in-depthly having really nice aims, which is not just about like being the zero emissions, but also giving several aims like providing sustainable and healthy food, also the energy, because even in Europe it's still a question, and especially people from Central European, also Roma communities, the energy, and also having like making jobs and skills training for transition, also providing the legislation that having strategic farm to fork, which is also the agriculture policy, and I think it's the green mobility is some kind of important part of it. So and it's how to explain like this gives a kind of pioneer initiative globally, and also refers to vulnerable group, not identifying any of them, but theoretical Roma under the Green Deal. And I also went through the Roma strategic frameworks. As you know, that the first one is already closed, and there is a new framework between 2020 and 2030. It's really interesting that even the first one was not so successful, and now we see that what has been learned from it, and now the protocols for implementation are better explained. But in this examination, I just tried to focus on just environmental policies or topics. It's really important that even though the Roma strategic frameworks prepared or published after 10 minutes after Green Deal, when it's referring to the European policies, the Green Deal is not part of it. So it's already, maybe if there was no connection between the working groups, or it can be intentional, we don't know, but it's not referring to it refers to social development goals. And the most important requirement for the member states are the access to water. And recently we have really, giving data, and this 95%, it's a kind of ambitious goals, is that it's the FRA research says that 1/5 of the Roma don't have running water in their houses. So this framework in the annex is giving the monitoring guidelines, and very, very well well explained, but generally puts everything on member states. And why it's interesting, this one, because we know that member states are called to implement the first strategic framework. Recently, what we see that there are some parts when environmental justice as a term are referred in this document, neither in the Green Deal or the core text of the Roma strategy does not refer it, and there is no explanation what does it mean, environmental justice. at the same time says to the member state that what has to be done regarding environmental justice. As I mentioned, the access to water is one of the main elements, and the other one is I mentioned the working conditions for Roma people. So this one for me it means that on one hand, from the huge package of environmental issues, because it's also it's not just access to water, not just hazard reform, and it's many things inside it. The Green Deal, based on which is forgotten from the European framework strategies, only the water access to water became an important. So even just some part of it, and still the conceptual and the same. But even though that there is no concept framework for it, or not explain, there is no information for it, we know that the recent human rights mechanism that exists, and also in the international and the regional one, it's able to provide how to say, like a framework for find justice. Of course, we know that these institutions are not working. Equality bodies, the cases what reported, very limited number of cases reported when human rights violations happens. Also, there is we heard that how was in Kosovo, but also in Romania, that it's really slow the processes. But still, at least in European level, there are several legislation and also tools which could help to find or reach environmental justice. At the same time, we are more towards to environmental injustice. So let's see the human rights obligation in UN level. We have all the, and even when we see that which European countries are ratified it, but it's we are in this way we could be really satisfied, because European countries are a part of and even like globally these UN treaties are widely ratified, and when it comes to that, how it flows. I mean, what is the link between human rights and environmental justice? We could see that several human rights are indirectly or directly. Both access to water is already mentioned, and it's like classified as like right to health, right to dignity when we speak about water, but even education, qualitative education is about how communities are able to take provide the circle, but even about like whether they're able to advocate for themselves or understand or able to be like a kind of environmental conscious. But several cases like Katalat is also like started as an eviction case of right to housing and the related right. And the most important one is like how in the procedure like communities are treated, rule of law, and right equal treatment or anti-discrimination obligation, how is respected. So generally we see that in international level there is well established treaties and mechanism, and also in and I just made a list about what kind of rights are affected, and when you speak about environmental justice, what are the relevant for us. Generally, what is I think it's important that international community, economic, social, and cultural rights, and civil and political rights, these two ones are generally classified as like second generational human rights. We know that there are several ongoing recent cases in national and international tribunals, so these rights are still violated, and these violations are leading way for injustice. And also really important to mention the Aarhus Convention, which is actually could be considered as a procedural environmental justice. And what is really interesting, very important for us, that EU and EU member states are ratified this convention and its access to information, but also about involvement in decision making when it's coming any kind of procurement, like in the process when they are an industrial project would start. I have to be concerned that I haven't heard any of Roma communities have been involved in advocacy or in actions or activities. So when we go through this, and even Council of Europe and EU having the equal treatment directives are really core part and important elements. European Court of Human Rights in these phases are just started to work on environmental justice, but equality bodies could be a good starting point for making or reporting human rights violations. I carried access to water and sanitation not because of the EU Roma strategy deals with it and make it as a most important part of the environmental related issue, but because of the cases what we have, and I carried Hungarian examples because I had data for it, shows well that sometimes it's multiple stakeholder things and even a technical decision by one of the local government or even just a service provider how how violates rights. So access to water is a well-established human right, while for a while it was considered as a part of the living standards of housing rights, but it's deeper than even it's clear that it seems that more than 60% of our human body made from water. It's about right to life. And in 2010, when UN declared it these not just about housing rights and living standard, but the right to life, and also the World Health Organization and other UN body made clear list. What does it mean, right, to water and what kind of condition we needed? It's also some numbers, but I'm not going to. I think most of the people who are there well aware situation of Roma, like what is the consumption per capita, and it's like even what UN said is 100 liters per day, but if you see the Hungarian authority says 20 or 30 liter, but even if you think about a family and there is no running water but public dwelling, that how it's possible to have water, I mean how many times you need to go to the public dwellings and the case is what's happening in Hungary, and it's not so old case actually. While the first one is like 10 years ago it happened, it's about closing this public dwelling during the summer waves. It's one thing that there was no information that the majority of the dwellings will be closed, and other things that it happened when the neighborhood where Roma live, so mostly populated by Roma, so affected Roma communities better than other population, and it was a kind of a punishment because the government thought that the people is using water like using for cleaning cars, but it was not the Roma communities, but it considered that like Roma misusing the water. The ombudsman initiated an ex officio cases and declared as a human rights violation, and the investigation went with the Green Ombudsman, and it was a kind of big media attention. And in 2017, other settlements have been closed during the summer waves again. And even it's not mentioned in the presentation, but in block of flats were limited access to water in Irak and also in summer period. Why it's important? It's yesterday have been mentioned that how Roma are treated, and in this way, like in ancient Rome, the civil code is accepting, like making the waterway like limitation of property. So it's quite important to access to water, not just recently in this age, but several hundred years. And still, when it comes to summer times, nobody were thinking about the communities. If the local government in Hungary, local government is the service provider for water, and in all the cases there was some like shortage of the local budget, but of course it's like also about not really think about the needs of communities. Several elders and children were involved in these cases. Right to a healthy environment is a third generational right. It's based on solidarity. A lot of time I don't go in these details. It's not legally binding, but the majority of the European countries are declaring in their constitution. It's other question what's considered as a healthy as an environmental, and if second generational rights are not granted and violated, whether we are able to grant this third generational rights. And I mentioned Aarhus Convention as a possibility, but it's just still a possibility because advocacy for Roma Forum organization or green organization, it would be a question. And what is needed if you want to reach environmental justice? What is needed? For sure, it's the advocacy part. It's problematic one. Using the legal tool, it would be an essential in this part. Also, empowerment, which could be helpful, and education, formal and informal. Data and research we are lack of recent comprehensive data we don't know about, because it's not just about access to water. It's several features could be and should be researched. Awareness raising and negative stereotypes, the role of Roma. Just we were here yesterday and also today about people who are collecting waste. When it comes to the Green Deal, it has a circularity part and single-use plastic directive, which considers quite important to tackle with this problem, but not using the resource and the possibility of these people who have knowledge of and could be used. So this kind of thing is also missing. And intersectionality, because especially for the community. So generally, environmental justice, in my understanding, is a kind of luxury or advantage possibility, which is definitely missing. And even like in the recent phase when human rights violation is still part of our daily life, we cannot move forward and have environmental justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Edina, for the interesting and very detailed presentation. So we're moving to the third presentation today. Is going to be by Georgios Tsiakalos, who is a human rights lawyer specializing in strategic legal advocacy. He is coordinating for the Roma Civil Monitor coalitions in Greece and Cyprus and special advisor to the Norway Grants Task Force on Roma Inclusion and Empowerment. He is going to present the paper named "In Quest for Environmental Justice for Roma in Greece, the example of Tsairia Settlement." The floor is yours. You have 15 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me to this very important academic forum. It's a real pleasure. I saw a banner outside about conferences from theory to praxis. I consider I have done the opposite, from praxis to theory, to a very, very important theoretical framework for practitioners, because we can use it also as a, let's say, legal prediction tool, and we can also formulate policies and understand how to fight disaggregation and more inclusive policies. Just an introduction. I got acquainted with Roma Matters from the Damocles Sword of Criminal Justice back in 2013, where I started my career as lawyer, and I was selected in the Council of Europe, European Union Just programs, where we provided pro bono legal aid in legal clinics. So I got acquainted with many different types of law, And back in 2019, I visited, when this program was in the post, I visited the settlement with a country exchange that we wanted to see things on the ground, and exchange views and ideas. And they were telling me that, have you forgotten us? This actually expressed the ongoing projects and experts in the field that just, sometimes they just last for a few months and then they disappear. I felt a sense of duty to help the community. And I said that we will go together against what was going on. So what was going on? It was actually what you fellow colleagues here have actually portrayed, but in reality. So there was attribution of collective criminality from the newly elected mayor, the municipal authority, everything that has to do with the pollution of the environment, and banning of plastics to remove the copper was attributed without evidence to the Roma community in Tsairia. And there was this discourse of raising a wall there to create a sort of apartheid between Roma and non-Roma. Then the new elected official said that he meant a wall of legality, changing a little bit. Well, the expulsion of Roma, I argue this, that actually the expulsion of Roma from one place to another in Greece creates sort of a typology of impoverished settlements without access to water sanitation, is being used by many, according to my view, by many candidates that are fierce, and they are trying to portray that they will solve the Roma problem once and for all. Then after what happened in September, many huts were abandoned with the household items inside, and this is a case pending before the National Forum. Well, to understand what it means to have a direction towards environmental justice, this is just a portrayal of what we have endured since summer 2019 till now. You can see how many proceedings are had to be litigated in various areas of law. We have what I would call direct forced eviction, which is the administrative protocol of eviction, legally trying to push aside the community, and indirectly imposing fines for illegal occupation of the area, for illegal construction, for electricity theft, for exposure, etc., etc. We had to endure police raids even during the COVID-19 pandemic. Even if they didn't bear fruits, we would have, for example, traffic violations. Or, as you may understand, these people, the Roma residents in the area, from the time they were born, they are illegal in the sense that the occupation is illegal. There is no access to electricity, so they have to find ways to be able to survive. So this case is pending before the European Court of Human Rights that has imposed an interim measure to not evict the community until further notice, and I will get back to it in a bit. So I used the methodology. It was very practical for me to use the methodology of the push to the wasteland paper, and I tried to actually implement it and demonstrate that it actually it fits all three categories. So we have a settlement which is situated in the eastern area of the Permian Gulf, which covers the area of Thessaloniki, the metropolitan area of Thessaloniki, in close proximity to the airport. It's a very unique situation because it's in two municipalities, so it has to do with a lot of different political choices. It's a public owned land, and there is a development plan underway. The settlement is and was cut off. The housing type and infrastructure, we're talking about shacks with cheap used materials, such as pieces of wood and rubber frames. And they have to deal with further issues such as overflows and using improvised methods that often create additional issues. Well, we have the infrastructure. There was a water faucet actually that was 200 meters away that was actually cut off during the first wave of the pandemic. It belonged to a shelter for stray animals, and they were using water from there. We don't have any connection to the electricity network. So, as you may understand, these are the impacts of being brought to court. And we have an illegal landfill and factory that is the main issue here. I will elaborate for that in a moment. So the thing is that we actually, with a very empowered Roma community there, with community organizing and legal advocacy, we actually try to shift the narrative. So, and produce a counter narrative in the media also, rather than also in the court of law. So, for example, the Roma residents were reporting on what is going on, about the ways that physical barriers were put in the area. The road to enter and exit the settlement is not accessible at all, only with pickup trucks. Back in 2020, a child lost his life because the truck was in the truck bed, and the truck the child fell over and passed it by and killed the child. Despite the living conditions, all children try to attend school. It's very hard though, because the bus cannot enter the settlement. And they may use the first town, for example. We have the exposure to the third category of the Western paper, the put in danger. Here, yes. So we have an area that functions as an illegal landfill, as a makeshift factory, and we're talking about rotten food, full of waste, human waste, cables all around. But we're also talking about the anomaly there. Also, is being taken advantage by Roma and non-Roma, using the landfill even to throw construction material, for example. And we have a toxic anti-Roma discourse. Even the residents try to counter it. They were showing in the first wave of the pandemic how they heat water in an improvised olive oil can and heating it from the ground. And someone comments, do they really take showers? Also, there was not any garbage disposal in the area, and there were two trash bins that were removed, according to the residents. The excuse that they are getting filled pretty fast. What happened as a means of eviction was the attribution of collective criminality, but the residents fiercely countered that argument. They even policed the area themselves and tried to find even non-Roma saying, speaking of sabotage, to light a fire and attribute it again to Roma, as you can see from this story. We have this kind of rhetoric online from a group that started to fight the environmental crimes, but it was open to the public. We had discourse like like the dirty and scoundrels for Roma candidate, even the formulation of Nazi-style proposals, and even disseminated neo-Nazi in the neo-Nazi website of the issue there. So the solution that was found was eviction. That everyone said it's Roma that they are actually proceeding in these environmental crimes. And as you can see, another paper suggests that the study of the map is that actually it's in the new spatial plan that actually starts from the settlement of the metropolitan area of Thessaloniki. So the removal of the Roma is necessary, but it's not mentioned. And regarding also the development plan in the area, the environmental impact study assessment also mentions that it's a necessary condition for Roma to be removed. So we have a long judicial struggle, and I'm only mentioning what is available for the public. It's what is contradicting to use for the sake of protection of the environment the environmental risks in the form of forced evictions and harassment. As you can see, this is how we had this alliance of sort of environmental racism and expressions of anti-Egyptian to be able to fuel this rhetoric and evict the settlement. We had the first decision back in October 2019. Against the municipal council administrative protocol against the decision. And on March 10, 2020, the very beginning of the pandemic, the court actually decided that acknowledges the illegal situation in the area, and that they are not actually occupying the area legally, and that all these illegal acts may take place, but that the removal in the area without being relocated, because I have to know that Roma themselves are not against relocation. They were asking it before, but not being evicted without any alternative measure and being fueling this vicious circle of exploitation and of ghettoization and exclusion. And the court actually attested to the fact that before the eviction phenomena that they have been observed in the past will contribute to the perpetuation of the problem, and actually annulled temporarily the protocol of administrative eviction. But we had 2 years after, we had the decision of the appellate court, and the court actually decided that no, the decision of administrative eviction is correct, because based on the rhetoric of illegal acts derived from the police authorities, confirming these stereotypes, and that also, in my point of view, reproducing the stereotype that Roma are nomads, so they won't have any issue to be evicted. So the very next day, we applied for the Rule 39 for interim measures before the Court of Human Rights, and the very next day, the court granted the request for interim measures. We also applied for the fact that during COVID-19, we will also have violation of Article 2 together with Article 14, because they will also be exposed to endangerment of their life, moving in the COVID-19 settings, and of course Article 8 and 3. And it's pending, of course, before the court. And after a month or so, the court, without having the reassurance of the municipality that will actually not implement the decision without providing alternative accommodation, decided, I think it's a very rare decision, to enact interim measures for an indefinite period of time. So just one thing to mention, also within my other capacities, I'm only saying that to make it clear, in my own private practice capacity, not in any role I may have. We also try to reproduce, to disseminate the issue of environmental racism with the Roma Women Association of the together with UNICEF, and we produced a video for the settlement, especially focused on Roma children, and how they access education. This will be available in a few weeks online, and it shows the story of a Roma girl trying to enter to access the school, and how she wakes up and what she has to face. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Georgios. So we are slowly moving to the last presentation for today, for this panel at least. Do we have one of them here, right?
Yeah, we will share the presentation.
Okay, so the presentation is on the paper called Whose Life Matters? The Need for an Anti-Racist Environment on Housing Justice. Please, Georgia, the floor is yours. You have 15 minutes.
Hello, everyone. Let me just set up the presentation. Let's see if I can make it. Is it okay?
Yes.
All right. So our presentation is titled Whose Life Matters? The Need for an Anti-Racist Environmental and Housing Justice. It was prepared by Enikő, Vincze, Vasile Gâlbea, who's a legal researcher, and myself, Gergely Zamfir. Enikő and I are sociologists and anthropologists at Babeș-Bolyai University, but we also work closely in Social Housing Now, Căști Sociale Acum in Romanian, housing activist group in Cluj, and this project, Just for an anti-racist environmental and housing justice, we thought of it as an extension of the work we did so far as Social Housing Now. So what we did so far was to support roughly around 100 families yearly to apply for social housing, mostly from the Patarăt area that you probably know of by now. And also we did all sorts of actions which pertain to advocacy with the aim to increase the municipal social housing stock, and all sorts of legal actions, including lawsuits against institutions responsible for waste management in Patarăt. So the research we did was conducted between 2021 and 2022, and we provided some analysis of the legal framework, some national and county-based information on housing in toxic environments through public info requests at various institutional levels. And we also have a case study on Patarăt, which includes the measurement of air pollution and the medical questionnaire. So we have this conceptual framework that we're still working on. So our main proposal at the moment is a way to think about how to support the integration of anti-racist principles in policy. because we aim at underlining the interdependencies between housing, environment, and health. So we strive towards an anti-racist environmental and housing justice, that is effective rights achieved through the fulfillment of socioeconomic conditions. And we're going to go a little bit through these categories. So I'm not going to go into detail about each of them, because the previous speakers already touched upon most of them. But what's clear is that there's already a number of legal provisions, international and national, that could be used towards in bettering the life of people living in toxic environment. But we also know that they're insufficient. In terms of housing justice and the right to adequate housing, we see housing justice as a manifestation of social justice in housing, which requires legal guarantees. Also, it requires housing development in practical terms. And there's all sorts of mostly UN-based legal principles for the fulfillment of adequate housing. So we need to note that down. We also have at the national level the housing law from 1996. However, the law does not explicitly oblige authorities to guarantee the right to housing, adequate housing. And also we need to stress that housing commodification, the financialization processes, and the speculative real estate market, they seem in practice to trump the right to housing. And they are also directly supported by the state. In terms of housing and environmental justice and the right to be housed in a healthy environment, there's also a couple of international legal provisions. And also some national ones. I'm just going to remind of a health-related legal provision adopted in 2007, which introduced some standard minimum distances between residential and sanitary risk areas. However, even though the rights are recognized and also incorporated in legislation, they are still valid. So we want to relate the two principles, the anti-racist environmental justice and housing justice, to make that is to make connections between housing, the environment, and health, and also besides any kind of analysis to include and proposal to include additional measures to counteract the negative effects of environmental racism to people identified through ethnic and/or social identities. So we're going to look at Patarăt, one of the case study in the EnhoJust research. We also had some other info. I'm not going to go into that, but I'm going to leave a link to the report at the end of the presentation. So maybe you've seen this picture already. So this is the city of Cluj-Napoca, and far away, but still in the legal limits of the city, we have the Patarăt area, which actually has 4 sub-areas. It's very close to the landfill, and also we have the airport here. But first, we have to talk a little bit about evictions in Romania. I think this part wasn't in the written in the text we sent. So from a housing perspective, when we look at the 4 areas in Patarăt, Cantonului, Modulare, Dallas, and Rampa, most of them are a product of forced evictions, most of them done by the local authorities. You can find some detailed analysis in an article we published in 2019 about Cantonului specifically. Also, the Modulare area is a product of the mass eviction in 2010. The Dallas area was there since it was formed in the early 60s, and it evolved afterwards. And the Rampa, the landfill area, is mostly a resettlement of people from neighboring counties. But we need to stress that most of Patarăt is a product of evictions carried out by the municipality. One brief parenthesis here. So when we look at evictions, they're not just post-social phenomenons, and we've seen this in recent research. We did archival research in Cluj and Baia Mare, and neighboring larger cities, and we discovered that thousands of eviction decisions were taken by the socialist administrations, mostly due to rent areas. But those evictions in the 1980s were mostly relocations, so not forced evictions. Well, obviously there were some cases, but in comparison to the post-1990 period, it's a huge discrepancy. So what those relocations meant, they were conveyed as a solution to failed proletarianization of some Roma, obviously not all of the Roma. You can find some in a recent article, some more details about that. What happened after 1990, we have some other data that says that the bailiff records at the national level says that there's been around 36,000 evictions, but including some other types of evictions. We know that evictions take place through various methods, including informal ones. We estimated that there are probably around 100,000 evictions which took place. Obviously, the Roma have been disproportionately targeted. And in terms of drivers, property restitution was one of the most important one, not the only one, but probably the most important. And also to stress here that the restitution process was an inherent racial project based on kinship, right? Who had available some kinship ties to be able to lay some claims on property nationalized by the communist regimes. Certainly very few Roma. Going back to Patarăt, we have some data finally on air pollution. The sulfide hydrogen. I'm not a chemist, so hopefully this is fine. We installed the team. We had an engineer in the team and also a medical doctor. The team installed some sensors in the Patarăt area, and as it can probably be very obvious, there's a red line in the graph here. That's the national limit, and in the Patarăt area, it's obviously very grossly surpassed. Also, in terms to with regards to air pollution, the PM 2.5 and PM 10 particles, we also measured them in the second half of the 2021, and we also see here in the graph that they've been very much surpassed. So we have some clear evidence now that there's actual pollution taking place with some hard data. Even though this kind of sensors, and I think this is an important point to make, this kind of sensors, they're not officially accepted sensors, but who does that? I mean, who actually measures this kind of data in this kind of areas? Well, the institutions responsible for this kind of, particularly the environmental agencies, they don't actually do it. So this is just a start. We also have some medical data. We applied a questionnaire, 25 questions to almost 300 people in Patarăt area. Median age is 38.5 in the survey population, roughly equal by gender. To stress here that just 15 people over 65 years old live in the area, which is consistent to previous research from 2012. So there's a consistency in well, people dying at earlier ages compared to the most other parts of the city. Everyone considers the living environment a health threat, and they are affected by municipal waste and smoke. And cancer and heart diseases are prevalent in the area. A quarter of them do not afford a medical treatment, and around a quarter of them present headaches, dizziness, and acute respiratory infections. And also half of them cough daily, which all this kind of results could be connected to environmental pollution. However, it's very difficult to actually prove that in the Romanian court, because we have a lawsuit against well, I think 7 or 8 public institutions, including the environmental agency, the county council, the local council, and so on. And it's when we can already find that it's very difficult to actually link them legally, this kind of results with pollution emitters. What we aimed for was to come up with a sort of empirical response to the call for studies issued by the European Environmental Bureau. And we agree with the EBB that there's a need for environmental, social, and economic policies to address unequal exposure to the dangers of pollution, as well as unequal vulnerabilities of different groups. We send the results to multiple public institutions, and yeah, we demand that there's a direct legal provision. There should be legal provisions to tackle the specific racialization processes unfolding with housing and environmental characteristics. We didn't focus here we focus more on legal perspective, because we conceive this more as a policy report, but we need to at least to underline here that we have to widen the perspective and embed it in political economy, because we have issues such as land value, labor conditions, and the market, rental markets that we need to take into account. You can see the report available at this address, and obviously you can contact us for more information at this addresses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iulian. So after we heard 4 presentations, now it's time for Brototi Roy to give her feedback, and you have 10 minutes to reflect on the presentation before the viewers.
Thank you so much, and thank you also for inviting me to be a part of this panel and to read the papers beforehand. I really, really enjoyed them. And what I really liked about this panel was that this is engaged research and activism. So everything that we heard of and everything that they have been doing comes from what are the ways in which one can connect and one can see with the different injustices happening in different parts of Europe on Roma communities, and what are the ways in which we can tackle them. I think in this room, I am probably the least qualified to talk about Roma communities. So what I wanted to do as a discussant is try to bring in my experience working with similar marginalized and oppressed communities in a completely different part of the world, in Eastern and Central India, and link it a little bit with what were the theories and what were the ideas and what were certain tools or certain explanations which I could think of connecting with all these 4 papers, and maybe you find it useful to carry on future research. So looking at all the 4 papers, one thing which was quite evident was this idea of critical environmental justice. In some of the papers, it is mentioned explicitly. So this idea comes from David Fellow, and it's one of the newer additions to environmental justice. And he talks about 4 different pillars of environmental injustices. And in all the papers, I can somehow link the 4 different pillars and what are the ways in which it relates with this anti-Roma discourse. You mentioned this idea of intersectionality. I think when we want to look at the different social categories which result in multiple levels of oppression, intersectionality is quite an interesting way to go through it. In the last discussion also, we spoke about how certain people got access because of kinship relations. You discussed a little bit about what are the impacts on women and children.
So once we start looking at multiple categories together at the same time, a fuller picture emerges. So maybe that could be something of help. The other pillar that it talks about is the multiscalarity of space and temporality. So to do, like in the last presentation about 40 to 50 year history of what are the ways in which housing injustices have happened in the community, what are the ways in which different legal frameworks have changed over the years, what are the ways in which now evictions happen compared to how they happened before, also allows to see how oppression and exploitation somehow continued despite regime changes, despite overall national policies being changed. And I think that is also an interesting entry point to look at how this mothering and how this more the social exploitation continues over the years, despite all the laws which have now come into place, despite all the new frameworks which are coming into action. Then the third point is this idea of this perceived expendability of marginalized population. And I think this relates much more to your point, Georgios, on how this narrative is built, on how what the social media talks about, how it is so common, or how it is so offhandedly said about these perceived notions of what exactly does this community stand for. And this also comes from, so my engagement with this also comes from this same kind of patterns for indigenous and the Dalit community in India, this same disdain by which rights are, or by which they are considered less than other more majority population in a region. And I think that is also something which should come out more often, that the ways in which somehow it is just accepted that certain populations or certain people deserve less than the others, that the development of certain part of a country or the world should be on the shoulders of these other communities. And I think this is something you can also engage with a little bit more. And finally, this idea of or this idea of the role of state. I think this is very important, and many of you also picked it up in different parts of the presentation. And this one idea comes from post-colonial environmental justice theory, is that the state works as a weak state and as a strong state, depending on the context. So, for example, it works as a strong state to evict people, but it works as a weak state when complaints are lodged against these evictions and they somehow don't seem to see it. So I think this is also something you can engage with a little bit more to see what is the role of state in reproducing and in allowing for these social inequalities to carry on. Compared to talking about the last presentation, the fact that these data are not official data, maybe this idea of action research or citizen mobilizing science can also be something which you can think of to give, again, example from where I know from India. There was this thermometer producing plant which did a lot of mercury poisoning in local lakes in a certain part of India. And somehow the state and somehow the official reports just said, no, everything is fine, everything is under control. We are not overtly polluting your region, but local people could continue to see that the fish in the pond were dying, the soil was not well. And so at some point they decided, no, we have to do our own measures, even if it's not the correct or even if it's not officially mandated, but we need to find out what exactly is happening in our neighborhoods and bring in this data and show that we don't need scientists sitting in fancy labs to do this work for us. We see there is something wrong and we would like to figure out what is going on. So this idea of action-oriented research or citizen mobilizing science, I also think is something which would be relevant. And I think, but this then I put in the academic hat, is that trying to also invite you to look a little bit more at the big picture of how these injustices are connected through marginalized communities everywhere in the world. And one scholar I can invite you to look at is this person called Sara Vargha, who comes from this, like the most marginalized community in India, the Dalits, who are considered untouchables, and does a very good analysis of how these communities in India face quite similar the injustices that Roma communities faces in Europe, which is quite similar to the injustices that Black communities face in the US. So maybe that will also be something to discuss or think of in the future. And yeah, I think that's it. I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Brototi, for the elaborate reflection. So now we have time until 1:30 to have questions from the audience. I suggest we collect 2 or 3 questions and then we have time to respond to them, and if we have time, we can have another round. Yeah, please.
Thank you very much for the presentations. I'd like to, one question for Georgia from Cluj. I think you can hear us. Hi, Georgia. I was wondering what was the reply of the environmental agency for you when you came up with this data from the Eurojust report, with the data of pollution from Patarut? What did they say? Or if they reacted in a way or not?
We can collect 2 more questions and then we can answer. We have one there. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. I have a question about evictions, and I have zero legal background. So to Rufat and Georgios, who are lawyers. So these evictions that happen like all over, as we saw, from all over the Balkans, from Greece to Romania, how are they legal? And isn't this perhaps a case? Can it be a case against the rule of law? But again, I have no legal background, so I was just wondering if you can provide like legal context. How are these evictions legal in itself? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we have one here and then we can both ones. Thanks.
I have questions to Georgia. First of all, I would like to thank you for the presentation. I really like your idea and narratives of the thing. My question is related to Selanik. Welcome, first of all. My research topic also is related to a little bit about Selanik at population exchange between George and Pécs. As we know, that Selanik was an important place for the Roma Muslim migrants who came to Turkey during the population exchange. And these migrants generally were working in agricultural area. More than 80%. There is a data about it. I am wondering about are there any racist law after the population exchange period in Greece? And what is the real facts of environmental injustice in Selanik case?
Okay, so we can have one more question, yeah, and then the answer.
I have a question on Edina. Thank you very much, first of all, for a very interesting presentation. The question is quite specific because you've mentioned Aarhus Convention a few times, and there is like a separate mechanism linked to the Aarhus Convention called Aarhus Centers. I'm not sure if you are familiar with that, and it has been quite widely applied to the context of outside the EU. I mean, the Aarhus Centers are quite prevalent in the Eastern Neighborhood countries up to Central Asia. It's supported by OSCE. And I was wondering, and this is something maybe people who are older in this room than me might remember if there were previously any Irish centers in Central and Eastern Europe, or if there is any discussion whether these centers could be used, because I think there is a clear content-wise, there is a clear overlap with the Roma communities and the environmental issues. So I can't see it like why Irish centers are not used in this region for this particular case. But I was just wondering if you came across anything like that. I know it's slightly outside of the primary focus, but it was just curious since you mentioned it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I think the first question was for Georgios. If you're ready to answer.
Okay, thank you. The sound quality is not very good, so hopefully I understood. So if we got a reply from the environmental agency, no, obviously, but we did have some discussions, and I think this is interesting in a way, from a former head of an national environmental agency. He was saying that so there's a national inventory of contaminated or potentially contaminated areas in Romania. That there was a draft of it issued, I think, 10 years ago, but it was never put into effect. So at one point they were saying, when we had discussions, that the president was saying that he could send us the national inventory list more or less informally, which was very strange, and we agreed not to take that route. In the end, the government decided to redo the national inventory, which seems just a way of prolonging something and not taking any kind of decisions on that. But this kind of inventories are very important because there's so much economical pressures on all sorts of areas. So the government just avoids taking any kind of decision. This directly affects the Roma living in toxic environments. So this is what we know from the interaction with the environmental agency so far. I'm not really sure if the second question was addressed to me or the other Georgios about evictions.
Well, I mean, if you have an answer, you can reflect on it about the legal aspect of the evictions.
Yeah, so there's not too many legal protections for people at risk of eviction in Romania. More than that, 10 years ago, there was a new civil code, which actually decreased the level of protection almost close to zero. So besides the 3 months during the winter when evictions are not legal, even that's not completely protected. There's not so many other protection measures. So evictions can take place legally very easy. This was not always the case, because legally there was another protection awarded to people living in nationalized housing in the 1990s, but that's gone as well. So that obviously again impacts most of the Roma living in nationalized housing, and it's still a process that's going on. A lot of people think that the restitution process, property restitution process, is over, but that's not the case. Yeah, this is a very short answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgios. If some of you also has an answer for the second question on the legal aspect, maybe can reflect as well. Yeah.
Well, I'll try to just answer from not a legal matter as much as I can. Well, there are different standards as to the way evictions take place, and there are some international standards mostly derived from the jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights, but also from the UN Human Rights Committee. One derived from many cases, namely one important case, Jordanova versus Bulgaria, what we call, we are talking about the interference with Article 8 of the convention, meaning interference with private and family land, with a home. So there is a test, what the standards entail. There is a test of whether we have interference with Article 8. So we're talking about, if we're talking about the home, so the court is clear, even if it's a hut, even if it's something very, very handmade and improvised, it is home in the interpretation of the court. So yes, we would have an interference when someone will be evicted from their home. And then we're talking about what you asked about legality. Legality may be there, but there are other stages that we have to consider. So legality means that a lawful eviction order, for example, means that it was there is applicable a legal framework that says, for example, if you occupy a public land, the authority has the right to evict you. And then we have two other tests, which is if there is a legitimate aim, if it pursues a legitimate aim. So, for example, a legitimate aim would be that they want to evict the tenant, the residents, the illegally they occupy tenants because, for example, they have to build a park. And then it is to balance out the necessity in a democratic society, meaning that we have to balance out, for example, the fact that since when you push someone from their home, which is one of the most severe forms of interference with the right to their home, we have to look at the proportionality and the reasonableness of the measure. So this is portrayed also in Greek domestic system, but with a different view. In the cases that I showed you, it's about abuse of rights, meaning, for example, when we have a Roma community in the States for 40 years, is it not abusing the right to evict them? It's kind of a control vision for abusing rights. I think this is the way to portray.
I just would like to add something regarding the civil code, because we hear that what is the international standard, but when it comes to like evictions, generally it's really practical that there are different kind of situation, but first when it's legally, when there is a contract between the tenant and the owner, it could be like private one, could be a state or local government owned, and you are when you ask where it's legally, it's the easiest way when the owner says that the tenant violates the content of the contract. It's sometimes it could be just not paying fees or just not behaving in the way that, for example, the neighbors want it, and neighbors starting to complaining about others, and then the local government says that they were like violating the contract and therefore it's lawful. There are some periods, even because of humanity, like in winter period, it cannot be. So even in this, there are some limitation of the civil code, but pretty easy in practice to say like a contract have been violated and this is lawful to be doing. Another way, when we heard many cases when an informal settlements are, there is no contract. So since there is no contract, then the owner of the land says that it's legal because they have no legal basis to be there. It's other question that human rights standard comes, and there are several cases when like the case that people live there, and even though they had other provisions which could make it legally, but this is the easiest way how lawyers think in the local governments or in the city halls, like have contract or don't have contract. Even the contract when it expired and not prolonged, it could be lawful that they are saying, okay, this is the end of the contract and that's it. So it's and it's really difficult. There is interim measures by the European Court of Human Rights, but it's really rare when it's applied. So generally, it's really fast when it happens that a contract or without a contract, it's considered that the eviction being legal, considered legally by local authorities or all of our stakeholders.
If I may just add something, yes, thank you so much for that, for referring to the contractual perspective. I was speaking about the public law and occupied public land, so that's different.
But even when it comes to public lands, it's also the civil code which is the basis. So
of course,
yeah, and this is somehow it's faster than the international legal standard. So yeah.
Yes, definitely. Just the thing is that there, the public can actually be fierce. When we have a contract or an occupation of a private land, then the individual that owns the land, we have to use an action before the court. And it's very, very actually interesting and progressive in the jurisprudence in Greece that a court actually demonstrated that the rule that the state has to pay damages to the owners because it hasn't implemented Roma strategies for housing, and although there was funding available, and omitted to actually relocate the settlement.
If I can add something, Social Housing Now, Cluj Social Acum, are members of the European Action Coalition for the Right to Housing and to the City, which is a coalition formed of 30 to 40 member groups from various countries from Europe, also non-EU. And one of the actions we had was a series of anti-eviction workshops in Cluj last year, and we have a handbook against evictions, which you could probably find on the website of the coalition, housingnotprofit.org. And you can find various experiences of people fighting against evictions. One of the things being how to use the legal framework at hand, but also how to do more than that, like organizing people. And in the handbook, you'll find and some of the results of the work that has been done by these groups in various parts of Europe. I hope that would be useful.
Thank you, Georgia. The next question, I think, was for Georgios about the population exchange.
Yes, thank you for this question. I'm not very knowledgeable to the historical facts. Of course, I've come around to access it for different reasons. Empirically, from my experience on the ground and the conversations I have with Roma, and of course how they are. So I'll try to answer both your questions about also the situation of environmental classes in Thessaloniki, the metropolitan area of Thessaloniki. We do have Roma that are part of the Lausanne exchange of populations. Many are Greek Roma, Orthodox, and many other are also a few Muslim Roma. Also some have migrated from Eastern Thrace, Western Thrace. So, for example, there is a very small Muslim Roma settlement in Greece. In Thessaloniki, we have a major segregated area that is socio-spatially segregated although it is in the urban fabric, but there are physical and human-made barriers. There are also impoverished settlements. What we call in the typology of settlements is type 1, lacking access to water and sanitation. There is the Sofia settlement that was a model location from another area outside of Thessaloniki, but unfortunately it became uncontrollable, and now there are thousands and thousands of residents. We have also the Tsairia settlement, which is also socio-spatially segregated, lacking access to water and sanitation. And of course, we have Roma that are in a sense assimilated in the urban fabric. We have to comment that Greek Roma are Greek citizens, so there is no any way to have segregated data on that. So yes, there are different typologies of settlements and of housing conditions, but I'd say that the shared characteristic is the environmental justice aspects or injustice aspects that vary from area to area.
Yeah, sure.
I just wanted to continue a bit conversation about evictions actually, and to ask Georgios if this was the first attempt for eviction in recent Greek history. Because in the Bulgarian context, there was a similar case, maybe it's the same court case you referred to, someone in 2008, where they tried to evict and the European courts intervened. And since then, Bulgarian politicians have been very careful about evicting communities. Basically, the rule they're following is you have to provide an alternative homes. Now, what they're doing is actually they give there's this temporary housing in case of disaster or something. The municipality has this kind of residence halls or something. So they will move these people. However, there by Bulgarian law, they should stay, I'm not sure, 3 months or 6 months. And then it's really practical thing if this community managed to cling on to this house for a longer time, or because at that time it's kind of quiet, their, the term expires and they're again homeless. But this has happened a few times, much rarer now in the court case. But maybe it's something you should look out for. It's kind of tricks. Individual evictions still continue, individual families, when the local, authorities know that this family will not be able to fight it in court. Like there is Bulgarian Health Committee, which is similar like pro bono lawyers, but they're very tired of a lot of work, so they only engage with families who are enough. How to say? They will follow up the whole process. Very much nice families, they will give up in the middle or something like this, and they'll try to know this. So this is like additional context, maybe. Also, another reason for evicting, at least in Bulgarian context, when the building is not built by the building codes, it is illegal, and the municipality can take it down because it's dangerous by Bulgarian law. Yeah, I wanted to ask, you mentioned that the local community mobilized and made local media campaign about their viewpoints in relation to my talk. How easy was it did you manage, the group you work with, did they manage to get into mainstream media or just alternative blogs and things like that?
Okay, very, very, very interesting and very insightful input also from the Bulgarian perspective. Yes, well, actually, I think that is the reason behind certification. It's actually a way to shape, apart from, of course, the principle of protecting the ones that you represent, but also the ability to shape policy making and actually generate a larger societal impact. regarding what you're saying, no, it's not the first time that evictions take place. It is just a few times that there are legal scholars, lawyers that are there to care, and actually there must be a reason to be actually engaged in this kind of engagement. Actually, I would say that it is one of the, in my point of view, one of the main reasons of generating this vicious circle of environmental racism, in the meaning that we're talking about a kind of enforced, forced nomadism, going from one place to another, and just, you know, just putting the problem to the neighbor or municipality or whatever, and implementing what I call a zero policy. Well, no, there has been another case a decade ago in the Human Rights Committee. Two cases actually. This is actually generated some results for the municipality. What you're saying about it has to do with actually, yes, having having provisions for providing alternative accommodation. So this is where we have to advocate, as what you said, to have concrete, actual alternative accommodation, because the court, the European Court, or other judicial fora functions tolerating from the tolerance of the states, right? So if you cannot, when there is a kind of, let's say, reassurance that this is where we have to actually proceed in demonstrating the actual needs and the alternatives as to give concrete policy on that. And it has to do a lot with the social housing. If there is no social housing, then no kind of concerted action and assessment prior to any kind of eviction, because the thing that we have to realize is that we cannot be prima facie like saying that we have a vulnerable group, a vulnerable community, they will never interfere with their right if we have a legitimate aim in the development plan, for example. But we have to understand the characteristics of the community and support them to holistically include them into society. That is the meaning of I think, the international jurisprudence. I think that strategic engagement really helps in this area. I hope I can answer the question.
We have around 10 minutes. We can have one more round of questions. Yes?
I haven't finished. I haven't answered the other question.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Yeah. So regarding the Our House Center, thank you for asking me. Actually, in my presentation in my paper, I focus on new member states, and Our House Centers are being established or with the help of OSCE, and there are countries in Albania, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Serbia, Belarus, and Ukraine we have this Our House Centers, which could be really useful. And at the same time, in EU context, there is EU directives, and all the member states made their implementation. So there is a mechanism, and even Our House Convention has a compliance committee which follows how it has been monitored. And my approach was on that we not even use it. So, like, one thing is the access to information, and yesterday Julia mentioned it, so it's important, but also about the decision-making process, whether it's a private or state or local government funded project, whether any kind of social group are involved in decision-making process. And it's important to be involved like meaningfully, because I guess even when it happens, it just happening that some certain group like makes something, okay, we are fine and we can take the vote. So generally, we don't have even the awareness about the procedure and to use it. So first, and I don't think, and there's not too much room about program organization to have capacity, or even which has dealing with other kind of problems. And with the green organization, there are many of them not really think about holistically or think about Roma community. So there should be necessary for some link with the stakeholders to use this one. But for sure, the center would be really useful. But I don't have numbers and didn't need research that what kind of cases have been, how was the decision-making process. I guess that, and this is for the future, because now we have already implemented project or ongoing, you cannot make a decision, but we're already implementing it, so.
Thank you.
No, yes, sure, but we have one more round.
A question about the media. Yes, we kind of actually took advantage the media attention, and we were able to also disseminate counter narratives in mass media. But there was also close monitoring of social media. So apart from using them to demonstrate the real cause, the root causes of addiction, we also used it as evidence to the courts.
Thank you. So, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on this spatial planning or urban planning, which I think is so important, because when I listen to what we have heard today, a lot is related that we focus on eviction and how to counter eviction, but the problem starts much earlier. And I think it's much more complicated to engage in urban planning and development plans. I think also with Latvia, that is a issue now. And I just wonder whether there is experience or, around how to do much more advocacy. And this would be at the municipal level. And I think there's also an access to power, because many of the affected communities cannot decide then on the urban plan or bring their interests into it. And I think that is something which is a lot overlooked, but would help because it would be a more sustainable solution. So meaning, for example, if we have an urban plan, we have a community or a city, what extent do we already, when we do the urban plan,